Javikir Sindarov has been absolutely dominant in this candidates tournament, sitting on 7 points and pulling away from the field. But the battle for second place is fierce, with Anish Giri just half a point behind Fabiano Caruana as they head into round those two meet directly today. And for Caruana, a loss could be catastrophic. For Giri, a win could cement his place as Sindarov's closest pursuer. The stakes could not be higher in this Italian game clash. Fabiano Caruana, the American world-class tactician known for his deep preparation and uncompromising desire to fight for the initiative, faces Anish Giri, the Dutch Grandmaster renowned for his rock-solid positional play and exceptional in-game technique. With Caruana leading Giri by 1 point heading into this round, the stakes are enormous for both men in what could reshape the tournament standings entirely. The Italian game with the classical setup. Leading into the Giuoco Pianissimo is one of the most fashionable openings at the elite level today. Magnus Carlsen and Caruana himself have used it extensively. The plans are subtle. White aims for a slow kingside build-up, while black fights for counterplay in the center and on the queen side. It is a deeply strategic opening where small advantages compound over many moves. Caruana opens with the king's pawn, staking an immediate claim to the center and signaling his intention to fight for the initiative from the very first move. Giri responds symmetrically, matching the central pawn and entering the classic open game territory where both sides will battle for central control. Knight to f3 attacks the e5 pawn immediately while developing a piece toward the center, the most natural and principled reply in the open game. Black defends the e5 pawn with the knight, developing naturally and keeping all options open for the coming middle game battle. The bishop eyes the f7 square immediately, heading into Italian territory and avoiding the Rai Lopez. This is the move that steers play toward the Giuoco piano. Giri mirrors with his own bishop on c5, the classical variation of the Italian. Both sides develop actively, pointing their bishops at each other's kingside. Caruana castles quickly, prioritizing king safety and activating the rook on f1 while keeping future options flexible on the queen side. Black develops the second knight, attacking the e4 pawn and completing a harmonious setup of both knights guarding central squares. The Giuoco Pianissimo defining move. Rather than the aggressive d4 push, white opts for a slow build-up, supporting e4 solidly and preparing to expand later on his own terms. Giri also castles, securing the king and completing a very natural development. Both kings are safe, and the real strategic battle is about to begin. The knight heads to d2, a typical pianissimo maneuver preparing to reroute via f1 and then g3 or e3. Building a flexible kingside setup, Giri solidifies his pawn center with d6, making the structure more closed and reducing the bishop on c4's scope against f7. Caruana prepares d4, the standard plan in this structure. The c3 pawn will support a future central pawn advance to challenge black's position, a key prophylactic and space-gaining move on the queen side. Giri stakes out territory on the a-file and signals his intention to generate counterplay on that wing, a standard Luft move in this variation, preventing any future pin along the g4 square and giving the king a little breathing room before white pushes in the center. Black retreats the bishop to e6, challenging the c4 bishop and seeking an exchange that could ease black's slightly cramped position. Rather than retreating or exchanging on e6, Caruana pins the c6 knight. This is a useful redeployment, eyeing the knight that defends e5 and potentially creating queenside pressure. Giri retreats the bishop to a7, keeping it on the long diagonal and out of immediate danger while maintaining its pressure on the f2 square. The rook comes to e1, centralizing and preparing the d4 advance that will challenge black's central pawn structure. Giri retreats the knight from c6, a voluntary repositioning. This frees the b5 bishop from its pin duty and prepares to reroute the knight toward a more active square. The central break Caruana has been preparing since move 5. White strikes in the center, opening lines and testing how black will handle the tension. The knight reroutes to g6, heading toward active squares on the kingside and eyeing f4 as a potential outpost. With the c4 bishop no longer needed to pin anything, Caruana retreats it to d3 where it supports the e4 pawn and monitors the kingside. Giri shifts the knight from g6 to h5, targeting the g3 square and beginning a maneuver to place a knight on the powerful f4 outpost. Caruana repositions his knight toward g3, anticipating the upcoming knight placement on f4 and preparing a defensive and active setup on the kingside. And just like that, Giri plants a knight on f4, a powerful outpost deep in white's position. From f4, the knight eyes the d3 bishop and restricts white's coordination. White brings the other knight to g3, challenging the f4 intruder and restoring some central coordination. Giri captures the d3 bishop with the knight, eliminating one of white's key pieces and winning the bishop pair, which could prove valuable in a more open position. Caruana recaptures with the queen, keeping the queen centralized and maintaining pressure, though black has successfully traded off the bishop. Giri continues his queenside expansion, advancing the a-pawn to restrict white's options and create long-term pressure on that wing. Caruana closes the center with d5, claiming space and shutting the bishop on a 7 out of the game temporarily. The engine, however, begins to favor black slightly from this moment. The bishop retreats to d7, a logical regrouping. It had limited scope on e6 with the center now closed, and from d7 it can potentially be rerouted. White plays the bishop to g5, generating some activity and eyeing the f6 square, looking to create pressure on the kingside. Giri chases the bishop away with f6, gaining space on the kingside and freeing the knight on g6 from any pin concerns. The bishop retreats to e3, a solid defensive square where it monitors the queenside and prepares to exchange with the bishop on a 7 if needed. Black captures on e3. Trading off the bishop and doubling white's e-pawns, this creates a structural weakness for Caruana on the e-file. Caruana recaptures with the f-pawn, accepting the doubled e-pawns. The f-file is now open, giving the rook on f1 potential activity. Giri advances the b-pawn, continuing his queenside pressure and threatening to create a passed pawn or open lines on that side of the board. Caruana challenges the queenside pawn structure immediately, creating tension and trying to prevent black from establishing a dominant pawn chain. Giri captures en passant on b3, simplifying the pawn structure and leaving white with a weak b3 pawn that will need constant attention. White recaptures with the a-pawn, restoring material balance but leaving doubled pawns on the b-file that could become targets in an endgame. Giri repositions the queen to b8, a subtle move targeting the b3 pawn and preparing to swing the queen to more active squares. Caruana advances the c-pawn to c4, gaining space in the center and trying to create a passed pawn on d5 in the long run. The queen slides to b6, putting pressure on the e3 pawn and keeping an eye on the b3 weakness, maintaining black's queenside initiative. White leaps the knight to f5, a very active placement that threatens black's kingside and puts immediate pressure on the g7 square. The engine notes this gives black a slightly larger edge. Giri centralizes the rook to e8, adding pressure to the e4 pawn and connecting the rooks while keeping the king well protected. Caruana plays the knight to h4, trying to reorganize his pieces and perhaps target the g6 square. But the engine now puts black at -half a pawn of advantage. Giri strikes with b4, pushing the queenside pawns forward and threatening to undermine white's c4 pawn. This advance intensifies the pressure considerably. Caruana tucks the king to h2, stepping off the g1 square and trying to keep the position stable while figuring out how to handle the queenside pressure. A powerful rook swing to a3. Giri invades on the third rank, targeting the b3 pawn and creating real pressure that Caruana must address. White defends the b3 pawn with the rook, bringing it to b1 to prevent the loss of material on that square. Giri advances the rook to the second rank. An even deeper penetration that ties down white's pieces and creates long-term positional pressure. Caruana retreats the queen to d1, hoping to consolidate and potentially connect his pieces. The engine gives black a slight edge around 6/10 of a pawn. Giri captures the knight on h4, eliminating an active white piece and gaining material while keeping the pressure alive across the board. White recaptures, keeping material balanced for now, but losing the knight pair that was providing some kingside activity. Both rooks now mass on the a-file. A classic doubling strategy. Giri builds overwhelming pressure on the a-file and the white queenside. Caruana brings the rook to e2, centralizing and preparing to contest the second rank where black's rook is causing havoc. The queen swings to a7, joining the pressure on the a-file and preparing to coordinate with the rooks in a potentially decisive way. White shuffles the rook to c1, defending the c-pawn and trying to maintain some activity. In a difficult position, Giri repositions the queen back to b6, keeping pressure on both the b3 pawn and the e3 pawn, refusing to give Caruana any relief. White retreats the knight to f3, trying to improve the piece's position, but this allows black to improve as well. The engine's assessment dips to around -8 here. Giri plays h6, a useful waiting move that prevents any back-rank tricks and gives the king some air while keeping all the queenside pressure intact. The knight retreats to e1, a passive move as Caruana struggles to find active counterplay. His pieces are being forced into defensive roles. Giri's king steps to h7, a subtle prophylactic move that sidesteps any potential back-rank issues and prepares to advance further if the position opens up. Caruana finally captures the rook on a2, which had been terrorizing the second rank for many moves. He had to act at some point. Giri recaptures on a2, and now black has a rook on the 7th rank with a queenside pawn majority. The engine puts black at -7 here, showing a clear advantage. White plays the knight to c2, defending the b4 square and trying to create a blockade, but the engine now jumps to Caruana is in serious trouble. Giri plays the bishop to e8, a mistake according to the engine. With the evaluation swinging nearly 2 pawns, black had better options available. The bishop on a7 was a powerful piece, and moving it here slightly eases white's defensive burden. This was a moment where precision mattered enormously. Caruana seizes the chance to bring the queen to d3, a more active square where it threatens to penetrate and create counterplay against black's king. Giri plays the bishop to g6, another inaccuracy. As the engine swings over 2.5 pawns, black was still winning, but the margin is narrowing with each inexact move. The bishop here blocks the g-file, but lacks the commanding role it could have had. Caruana plays the rook to a1, threatening to enter the game along the a-file and fight back. White is trying to find some counterplay before the position completely collapses. Black captures on a1, another moment flagged as a mistake with a swing of over 2.5 pawns. Giri takes the rook, but perhaps a more precise continuation existed that would have maintained a cleaner advantage without allowing white any tricks. White recaptures with the knight, which is now on a1 where it is quite passive, but at least Caruana has avoided material loss and maintains some fighting chances. Giri advances the c-pawn, attacking the d5 pawn and trying to create a passed pawn on the queen side. The engine notes this as a mistake with a swing of nearly 2 pawns, as the advantage had been reduced. Caruana moves the king to g3, stepping toward the center, but this is a critical error with an engine swing of nearly 2 pawns. The king walks toward potential danger, and the evaluation swings to -2, giving Giri a substantial advantage once again. Giri swings the queen to a7, another move flagged by the engine as inaccurate with a swing of over 4 pawns. Despite the mutual imprecision, black remains in the driver's seat, but Caruana is being given multiple lifelines that he has been unable to capitalize on. Caruana plays the queen to b1, trying to generate counterplay and threaten black's king, keeping the position as complicated as possible. Giri advances the h-pawn to h5, threatening to march it further down the board. The engine swings nearly 5 pawns here, indicating this was again not the cleanest move, but black's advantage is growing. The king advances to f3, a bold march forward by Caruana. He is trying to activate the king as an attacking piece, but this is a very risky decision. The h-pawn storms forward to h4, fixing the white king and beginning to restrict its movement. The engine marks this as a mistake with a 5-pawn swing, yet remarkably, black's advantage continues to mount. Caruana's king boldly marches to g4, an incredibly adventurous decision as the king walks directly into danger. This pawn structure leaves the white king horribly exposed. Giri brings the queen to e7, centralizing it and targeting the e4 pawn while keeping the king under observation. This move is flagged as a mistake with a swing of nearly 6 pawns, but black's advantage has now grown to over 3 pawns. Caruana plays the queen to d3, a terrible blunder according to the engine with a swing of nearly 5 pawns. The queen steps into a position where black can deliver a devastating blow. White's king on g4 is now fatally exposed. And there it is. Giri unleashes f5 check with a massive engine swing of over 16 pawns. The f-pawn advances with check, exposing the white king on g4 to a deadly attack. With the king in the open and black's queen and bishop coordinating perfectly, Caruana's position is completely resignable. Caruana captures the f5 pawn, the only move available, but this leaves the king even more exposed on g4 with black's forces closing in. Giri's king steps to h6, the winning move in a completely won position. With the engine at nearly -10 and black's pieces dominating the board, Caruana resigned. The king on g4 has no shelter, and the attack is overwhelming. Fascinating and complex game where both players made multiple inaccuracies in time pressure, but Giri's queenside pawn pressure and rook penetration to the 7th rank ultimately wore Caruana down. The decisive moment came when Caruana marched his king to g4 and then blundered with the queen to d3, allowing the crushing f5 check that ended all resistance. Giri closes the gap on Caruana and moves to within striking distance of second place, while Sindarov continues to dominate the field. With just a few rounds remaining, the question is whether anyone can challenge Sindarov or whether the tournament is already decided. Let us know in the comments what you thought of this wild king march, and make sure to subscribe so you do not miss the next round.